So here we are in It's Only the Moon. Okay, so this is a really huge card, of course. The High Priestess is jam-packed in symbolism, no matter what deck you use. And in fact, the correspondences and relationships between the High Priestess and the Moon are all among the most consistent and the oldest. Like if you look at a chart of correspondences, the High Priestess and the Moon going together is one of the few that lasts. Lots of other things are associated with lots of other things, varying opinions, but this one is almost a core element in tarot. So no pressure or anything, Mel.
It's only the moon.
It's only the moon. Okay, so let's start real quick, I guess, with her title.
Yes.
Usually called the High Priestess, sometimes just called the Priestess. I think you did that in your deck, didn't you?
Yeah.
I think we've also seen her historically. Sometimes she's called the Popess or the Papess or Pope Joan, even. She's also been called the Juno, which is a curious choice. And I've also, what is her hermetic title?
The Priestess of the Silver Star.
The Priestess of the Silver Star, right. And that, actually, the Silver Star, that's the
very
AA,
evocative.
Isn't it?
Yeah. So, Crowley's organization, the Silver Star, the AA, the Astron Argon, or the Argentstrom. There's many different theories about what those two letters.
The idea is sort of silvery, sort of starry.
It's either Latin Silver Star or Greek Silver Star. You can take your pick.
And is it Priestess of the Silver Star? I've also seen Daughter of the Silver Star.
Priestess of the Silver Star, and Artemis is the Maiden of the Silver Bow, and you'll see they're very much related to each other.
Right, and I mean, regardless of tradition, whatever you call her, whatever name you give her, there's always this sacramental quality to this card, this idea of mediating between the divine and us, as being an intercessor or intermediary between the unknowable and our world.
Yeah, I primarily think of this card as, if you could sum it up in one word, it would be initiation.
Right. Okay, and well, as for the astrology, as we were saying, it's all about the moon. And there is, so much lunar lore packed into both versions of this card. Where should we even start? Crowns? I don't know.
Good question, yeah.
Which is complicated.
They both have the lunar crown, lunar and solar, I
Exactly.
suppose.
So many people see it as a lunar crown because it kind of looks like waxing, waning crescent and a full moon in between. And if you come from a Wiccan or pagan tradition, that's probably what you see, the triple crown of the moon. However, equally valid is the idea that it's the solar disk cowhorn crown of Hathor, right?
Right. Or the sun and moon conjoined. You have both the crescent and the solar disk, kind of also reminiscent of Isis. The earliest representation of the priestess is said to be the heavenly Isis, where all the Virgin Mary stuff, the Virgin Isis, comes into play.
Absolutely. And on the Crowley card, on the Thoth card, you have the seven
or eight phases of the moon, or
seven crescents descending from the top of her crown. By the way, if you haven't yet, please take out your Rider-Waite-Smith High Priestess and your Thoth Priestess, unless you're driving, as we always say. Okay, so seven crescents, that's interesting because 7 is actually the number of Venus, and I have heard that considered as a reference to the path of Daleth running perpendicular.
That she crosses right through.
Right, to the path of Gimel. So the Empress on the Tree of Life is like the horizontal arm of a cross, and the Priestess path is like the vertical arm of a cross, and hence this reference to Venus.
And you see that solar cross perhaps on the breast of Waite's priestess.
Yes. In fact, that could well be. In fact, it's almost in
I've heard that referred to as the mother and the daughter, which makes sense if you think of Daleth and the Empress and the Virgin and the priestess crossing paths there.
Right, and that actually brings to mind, to me, the myth of Demeter and Persephone as well, because it's such a Persephone type card, and the Empress is such a serious figure, a Demeter figure. And so, continuing with the lunar references, shall we talk about bows?
The black and the white.
Right. Oh, you mean Boaz. Do you mean bows or Boaz?
Strike that, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, that was like the world's worst esoteric misunderstanding. Right. I'm talking about bow and arrows. Shall we talk about
bows, yes,
archery?
Archery and bow. Yes, we should definitely talk about that. That's really interesting.
Yes, because of course that's a lunar reference in that it's the bow of, it could be the bow of Artemis for one, right?
The bow of Artemis, the bow and 2 arrows of the goddess Neith, the crossed arrows. The kind of brings in the reference to the path directly beneath the priestess.
Yes.
You know, the temperance or art card.
Yes, which is
the arrow.
Which is related to Sagittarius, which is the archer, and it is the arrow of the bow formed at the bottom of the tree. Ever so much archery in that card. It is the path directly below the High Priestess.
You see the bow on her lap, which is said to, and actually an arrow in her lap there.
Arrow
you see
too.
A bow and an arrow. That's also said to be a 3-stringed. Well, you know, it's kind of funny because Lady Harris calls it a sistrum, but it is not a sistrum.
Really?
I think she might have revised this card because if you look at a picture of what a sistrum is, you often see the sistrum being held in the hand of Isis. But it's almost like a rattle kind of thing. Whereas this looks very much more like a lyra of Apollo.
Yes, it does look exactly like a lyre. Well, that's, and it's interesting because it's also in the place of the sun, kind of, if you look at her body as a tree of life.
And Crowley says that she hunts by enchantment.
Don't we all?
It's another reference, too, to vibrating strings.
Right.
This card is a lot about vibration and the lunar fluctuation, these vibrations or ripples that are caused in the water that create form.
This is a card where we see that projective geometry at work.
Yeah, very much so. And you see, her body actually forms a giant cup through the geometry of those light waves or waves that you see. You can see that she is the cup. Just like the Magus was the wand, she is the cup.
Oh, nice. So that sort of emphasizes the strong connection between those two cards as...
Right, the wand and the cup, fire and water.
And water.
Very much associated with water, both because of the moon and its, rulership.
Yes, and they are two different ways of connecting with the divine, too. You can think of it. I mean, I almost think of it as, if this sort of contrast of divination versus magic, if the magician represents magic, she could represent divination in a way. But also to go back to the lunar stuff in the Rider-Waite-Smith card, we also have the crescent, the sickle moon at her feet, right? And as her robe devolves into water, I think the sickle moon is not only, besides being a lunar reference, I think that's something you see with the Virgin Mary, depiction of the Virgin Mary as the star of the sea, Stella Maris.
The blue robe, yeah.
And the blue robe, especially that.
I like the
color.
depiction there of the way the robe looks like water too, because it gives the sense of what I like to think of as heavy water. It's the source of all. This card is said to be the source of all water,
and it's just really interesting to see the way that both of these cards in the sequence this is the first time we see a reference to water proper, right?
And what I mean by heavy water, that's kind of an interesting term, but it's the idea that form is inherent in water and that water can take any shape or form and still remain itself. That is kind of a commentary on the virgin qualities of this card, where it can, it can create form and still remain itself and therefore virginal. It's kind of the idea behind matter, or the root of matter. Retaining its purity while creating.
That self-sufficiency or entirety to self is something that you also see in the Hebrew letter association of the camel that carries its own liquid.
That carries the water with it.
Across the desert of Dot. Okay, so well, why don't we go there? Let's go to Kabbalah now. And, arguably the most central, important path on the tree.
It's the longest path
longest
on the
one
tree,
by
certainly.
far. Okay, so this is the middle pillar. We've been to the pillar of force with the Fool. We've been to the pillar of form with the Magus, and here we are at last on the middle pillar.
Of equilibrium.
The pillar of equilibrium, that's right. So the long path that goes from Keter to Tiferet, or Tiferet.
Right, from the... One way of saying from the father to the son.
Yes.
It kind of speaks about her, the Isis nature as the mother of the child Taurus.
Now, in both cards, I believe there are kind of anatomical references to the tree that you can superimpose on the body of the High Priestess. In the Thoth one, of course, you have you have her up above the abyss in the cup form of
inside the cup. You can see the point of her crown as Kether, and then the two swirls of light on either side
as Chakma and Bina. Yeah. And then I have heard it said that, and I don't know whether this is true or not, that there's a book in her lap called The Book of the Hidden Mysteries. And I don't know if that's a euphemism or not. Probably is, because I don't see no book there. Anyway, so
if you look at an open book from the side, but it does kind of have that bow shape. So
I see that.
You kind of, it's if you use your imagination.
I want to do that. Yeah. So, but clearly, but that can be Dot. Anyway, it's going to be a closed book of hidden mysteries, a closed hidden.
It looks like an open book to me.
Yeah, it does. Well, and I think, I think, it could well be, as we mentioned before, to Apollo's bow, the sun bow, or lyre, or lyra. And then, of course, you have the moon under her feet. And then, and then you have all this flowering life gardens of Malkut in the bottom, where things go from being how do we put it? I think it's Crowley who calls her the idea behind all form. Is
correct?
That it? Right, there you go, and you have it written there. The path that travels from the archetypal world of Atzilut down to the formative world Yetzirah, and that's why we have matter taking root and blossoming.
Right, and we see down there, not only the forms there are, some of them, this looks like a sunflower and a pine cone, the Fibonacci spiral, the sequence, the crystalline kind of platonic solids going on there,
Yeah, all the different ways that matter can take form. And it also is familiar from our own natural world, as you're saying there. That's fascinating. And we should probably... and also so you can also quite easily read Tree of Life onto the Rider-Waite-Smith.
Right, those pomegranates.
Right, because the pomegranates are in the shape of the Tree of Life. But also, you can look at her body and say the cross is at Tiferet.
Yes.
Right, and the moon is at her feet for Yesod. So she's right there.
Between the pillars. Right.
Right, and then you have the book thing over by Hode, which seems sort of appropriate.
It's almost like she herself is the central pillar. Both cards show her between the pillars, and she's the central one with her body.
Exactly. While we're on Kabbalah, we should talk about the camel. So, Hebrew letter associated with the High Priestess is... Gimel, which means camel, and that is why, folks, there is a camel at the base at the Thoth version of the High Priestess.
And it's a white camel, too, which might perhaps be it could be lunar, and it could also be another reference to Kether, her path. She's the moon, but she's also the path from Kether to Tifereth, which I think is why there's in Crowley's version of the card, at least, there's so much light. She's clothed in veils of light.
Yes.
But it's funny because you often hear this card and the one beneath it, the art card on the same path, I've heard many times them referred to as the dark night of the soul, and it makes you wonder, what is this darkness if there's so much light? It's said that the light is so blinding. You're on the path from Kether to the sun. And it's so blinding as to obscure and create darkness. And perhaps that's a reference you see in Waite's card, the white pillar and the black pillar, the light and the darkness.
Right, the polarity of it, because those pillars, they're so interesting. They're supposed to be the Boaz and Yakin. That's what the B and J stand for. They are the pillars to left and right of the entrance of Solomon's temple. They were not black and white, though. They were made of brass. But it is a symbol that ties the Masonic imagery back into the card for us. And I also heard that They used to have pomegranates. Those brass pillars had pomegranates around the upper edge, but now we have them transferred into the veil. We should talk about
and
the
the
veil.
pomegranates are more of that seed cluster imagery, just in a different way. You know, the seeded apple, palm and granat.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Granatus meaning seeds and palm meaning apple.
Right. And
so it's a big part of that Eleusinian mystery theme where the cult of Demeter
and
Persephone.
Well, there's the myth of Persephone that this is tied to, where Persephone goes into the underworld. She eats the 6 or 7 grains of pomegranates. She's forced to stay in the underworld for those 6 or 7 months.
That cult was basically agrarian and about the vegetal forms. So,
but I think it's really interesting. That myth is kind of a perfect amalgam of elements for this card because of the way that the High Priestess negotiates between worlds. The fact that she goes between the divine world and our world, but also our world and the underworld.
Right, and there's the darkness, the light and the darkness, the above ground and the below ground, that whole summer-winter thing going on.
And the camel that takes you on the long journey between the two. The veil. Let's talk about the veil because, we have, I guess on the Crowley card, there's that net.
Veil's
silver
in
net
front of her.
Right.
It's a veil of light.
Whereas in the Weight card, the veil is behind her. And the veil is one of the things that you see in every High Priestess card, just like you always see either, you often see a book or a scroll, but you even see the veil or some kind of reference to a curtain or veil in the Marseille imagery as well. And I mean, I've always assumed that was a reference to the unknowable between worlds, the unconscious waters of the mind behind the veil, and also perhaps to the supernals, the supernals above the abyss,
ineffable thing,
right.
I like the way the veil in Crowley's card is these light rays or waves. They're almost like they do make me think of the moon, these wave forms, like you see the tides, and it's almost like showing the fluctuation of the moon, and it's instability and yet it's stability at the same time. It makes me think of the 9 of Wands card, which is also associated with the sun and the moon
and sun.
So it kind of makes me think about this card. Change is stability, that whole. So she's at a point of equilibrium, seated on her throne, solid, but there's also that sense of fluctuation and reflection and kind of wave forms moving through.
The idea that her stability comes from her changeability, basically. Yeah. The what's the Hermetic title for the actual moon card is like the Lord of Flux and Reflux or something like that. And which sounds excessively
you see
medical.
That on some of the 2 cards as well. I mean, she's card number 2, and if you look at the Rider-Waite 2 is the guy with the fluctuating discs or whatever.
That's right, the need for balance through.
But then you see in the 2 of Swords and the 2 of Wands the balance, the crossed swords or the crossed wands, where it's at a point of equilibrium. Which
is so much, that particular card is such a reference to this card because it is Moon in Libra, and it's like a little version almost of the Rider-Waite-Smith High Priestess. We should probably mention there is another lemniscate that's very hard to see, but it's there in the Thoth High Priestess over her eyes. You see that? Here, look on the big card here. It almost looks like a sleeping mask.
It's a lemniscate. Yeah.
It's a lemniscate.
It does look like a mask.
And, the idea that she, of omniscience and infinity, not necessarily accessible to us.
Right.
And her eyes are closed, aren't they?
It looks like it, yeah. She's looking within.
Right. And I think the veil and the closed eyes are also, I don't know if they're esoterically meant to be so, but they certainly give you a feeling of that secrecy and quietness that you associate with the High Priestess, the mysteries and the secrets. The eyes and the mouth are closed in Crowley's card, and the mouth is closed on Rider-Waite-Smith.
I thought of another reference to the arrows. So she's got the arrow in her lap, and below her, the path below her, is the Arc card, which is also a reference to Sagittarius and the arrow. She's like the force that either can ascend or descend. So there's both, aspiration and inspiration. So there's the upward arrow of aspiration towards Kether or the unknowable or God, and then there's the inspiration,
the downward inspiration,
coming from above down, down to this world, where the
it's
the
a two-way
is,
it's a two-way path. Right. About the pillars, the meaning of the B and the J, Boaz and Yakin. Boaz is translated as in him is strength. But I was reading yesterday that's a potential strength. It's not like, Samson's strength, but the potential of strength.
Which is the title of that Nine of Wands card, Strength.
Strength, exactly. Which is moon in Sagittarius.
Yes.
Right? And Yakin is God establishes or God prepares. So I don't believe they're meant to be read together like a sentence. I think that they each kind of stand on their own. But it's really interesting to think about it as, pillar of force and pillar of form, where the strength is in the pillar of form and in potential, and the pillar of force could be God prepares or God establishes, or vice versa, or window.
And the colors white and black, could refer to Kether and Bina.
They could. Who knows?
But they're said to be white and black.
They're supposed to be polar.
So they're said.
Yeah.
The yes and the no, the light and the dark.
Right. All right.
And it's also interesting that she's between the pillars, and the other card that's seated between two pillars is, the Hierophant.
Well, also Justice, although that's a sort of in the Rider-Waite-Smith specifically. But no, so there is this...
But they're not the same pillars.
They're not the same pillars. It's so easy to draw comparisons with so many others. I mean, like you can say the High Priestess versus the Magician. You can say the High Priestess versus the Hierophant. That's incredibly clear contrast. Or you can say even the High Priestess versus the Empress. It's almost like she forms a binary or a polar opposite with any one of those, and you get a different aspect of her face.
So in Manly Hall's reference book, there's a painting by J. Augustus Knapp of the Saitic Isis, and there's an inscription underneath. I think the statue is at the Temple of Athena at Sais. So it says, "I, Isis, am all that has been, that is or shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. The fruit which I have brought forth is the sun." And the sun is in quotes with a U, not an O.
Right, got you. So that refers both to her as the mother of Horus?
As the mother of Horus, as her path between the sun
and Tifereth.
The son of
right
God, in a sense.
Okay, great. Terrific. So we've got Isis imagery, we've got Mary imagery, we've got Hathor imagery, we've got Demeter and Persephone imagery. It's sort of like, the sacred feminines.
We've got virgin and fertility, both at once. We've got water and light and darkness.
And darkness. Yeah. And it's interesting. What is I'm trying to remember which binary goes with this one on the Tree of Life. With the High Priestess, we have wisdom and folly. That goes with this particular
interesting
path of the moon. Well, this is interesting because that is almost like a moon reference right there, right? Because you have lunacy that comes from the moon, and yet you have the moon's intuitive wisdom or something like that.
Right, and it also makes me think folly, the fool, and Kether, and wisdom, and Chachma, perhaps.
Maybe so, right. The equal-armed cross, we mentioned that right at the beginning, but that is, the idea that it's equal-armed is important, that it's not sort of a, long cross.
It's the solar cross.
It's the solar cross, and it's references to every set of four that we have, whether it's cardinal directions.
Sometimes you see that as also the six-pointed star, instead of the solar cross.
Right.
Again, a Tifereth reference.
Anything else we need to cover in here? I sort of feel like there is, but I can't think of what it would be.
I'm sure there is.
Symbol-wise, anyway.
Numerology, colors, smells.
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, it's worth pointing out that the Roman numeral 2 just, again, encapsulates that sort of binary thing that's going
on. The polarity, the tides, the poles, the reflection and duality.
And, and it's also worth looking for, hopefully at some point we'll have the chance to do the minor arcana as well, which we may be able to do with your support. But it's interesting to think of this card and then to remember the moon minors, which would be, as we've said before, the Nine of Wands, moon in Sagittarius, the Two of Swords, moon in Libra.
Right.
There's also moon in Taurus, Six of Pentacles, or discs.
Yeah. Six of discs.
And there should be two more. I want to do it with my head. Moon in Aquarius, Seven of Swords. Let's see. Cancer. Moon in Cancer.
Yep.
Four of Cups. There we go. Yeah, there it is. So when you're looking at that card, this card can be in the back of your mind as well, because it's intimately tied to those. Let's see. I didn't have any camphor on hand going to smells, but I have what people use for synthetic camphor. So you may want to think before you smell this, it's alpha pinene. So of course, camphor is a terpenoid. It's something you get from evergreen trees. And camphor is always associated with these watery fragrances. And so this has a little bit of that sharpness. I think when I think of camphor, I kind of think Vicks Vapo Rub, although that's kind of a eucalyptus thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Similar though.
Same idea, the thing that opens you up, which seems appropriate for a card so intimately tied with water and with the fluids of our bodies. Okay, so this is interesting. The moon is in G sharp. Like, that's going to be the name of my memoirs. The moon is associated with G sharp and the note G sharp. And I had a funny feeling when I was looking at it that I thought that the Moonlight Sonata might start on a G sharp. And you know what? It does.
Interesting.
So this is a G sharp, otherwise known as an A flat, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to call it a G sharp. And the interesting thing is that the Moonlight Sonata is actually in C sharp, the key of C sharp, but it starts on G sharp, which is essentially part of the tonic chord of C sharp. And, there is some speculation that Beethoven was a Mason. We don't know, but maybe he did it on purpose. Wouldn't that be cool?
It would.
So this is kind of fun. I looked at Agrippa's suffumigation for the moon, which has, besides camphor as ingredients, frankincense, because all the gods love frankincense, white poppy seeds, white for the moon, I guess, bull eyes, maybe because, I don't know, the moon is exalted in Taurus. I don't know. Goose blood, frog heads.
Ew. I can see frankincense because the moon reflects the light of the sun.
Yeah, I can totally see that too. That kind of.
But like you said, everyone loves frankincense.
Everyone loves frankincense.
I think if someone wants to do some homework on this card, Case said about this card that it's a depiction of the 7 Hermetic truths.
Really?
And if you want some reading, you can go to page 6 of Wang's Kabbalistic Tarot book and read those 7 truths, because they really do apply to this card. It's pretty incredible.
Oh, it's great. I'm not going to read it to you. You're going to have to look it up.
And perhaps those 7 lunar crescents that you referred to are related.
I can totally see that. So, well, you know what? I'm going to just read the names of them.
Yeah.
And then they can go.
Fun.
They're fun. Okay, number 1, the principle of mentalism. All is mind. Number 2, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. The principle of rhythm, everything flows out and in. That's
flux and reflux. The moon,
right?
Yeah.
The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has an effect. Hey, this is thermodynamics. And the principle of gender. Gender is in everything, unless you're Crowley, in which case a penis is in everything. Man, is this a family
it has to be
show?
in something.
Okay. Well, anyway, yes, those 7 timeless truths brought to you by Mel and Susie from Robert Wang's The Kabbalistic Tarot. He has more to say about them, and it's worth reading. Okay, I think that wraps it up for the High Priestess, and we'll be back next time with the Empress. Thanks. Come back.